night caller. Emily Adams had always been a night owl. Her job as a graphic designer often kept her up late, working under the soft glow of her laptop screen in the quiet hours of the night. She relished the stillness, the way the world outside her small apartment seemed to sleep while she worked. But lately, her nights had taken a disturbing turn. It started innocuously enough. One late evening, her phone rang. She glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. The number on the screen was unknown, but Emily had always been practical, not prone to paranoia. Maybe it was a wrong number. She picked up. Hello? Silence. She could hear nothing but faint static on the other end. Hello? She repeated, a little more firmly this time. Then came the breathing. Slow, deliberate, and too heavy to be normal. After a long pause, the line clicked and the call ended. Emily shrugged it off as a prank. Kids messing around, probably. She turned back to her laptop, trying to refocus on the project at hand. But even as she worked, the memory of the call lingered, making the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. The next night, the phone rang again at exactly 11:47 p.m. This time, she hesitated before answering. When she finally did, it was the same. Silence, static, and then the breathing. It was deeper now, more deliberate, as though whoever was on the other end was savoring each breath. She hung up without saying a word, her hands trembling slightly. The calls continued, night after night, always at the same time. The breathing became a regular part of her nightly routine. Emily started leaving her phone on silent, but the eerie sensation of being watched, of something sinister lurking just beyond her understanding, gnawed at her. A week passed before the voice came. Emily. It was distorted, like a recording played too slowly, or a voice manipulated beyond recognition. She froze, the blood draining from her face as her name slithered through the static. Who is this? She demanded, her voice shaky but resolute. The breathing returned, slow and heavy, before the voice spoke again. I know you. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her rational mind tried to dismiss it as a hoax, but fear was tightening its grip around her, squeezing out all logic. The next night, the caller said more. I see you, Emily. She slammed the phone down, her body trembling. How did they know her name? How did they know anything about her? In a panic, she called the phone company the next day to change her number. For a while, things seemed to settle down. A few nights passed in blessed silence, and Emily began to relax, convincing herself that whoever it was had finally lost interest. But on the fifth night after the change, her new phone number rang. It was 11:47 p.m. Emily stared at the screen in disbelief. The number was still unknown. With a sinking feeling of dread, she answered. Emily, the distorted voice purred. You can't hide from me. She hung up immediately, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This was impossible. She hadn't given her new number to anyone yet, not even her closest friends. The calls kept coming, each one more terrifying than the last. The voice began recounting details of her life. Things no stranger could possibly know. The name of her childhood pet, the color of her bedroom walls, even the date of her father's death. Emily's terror escalated, and she started avoiding her phone altogether, leaving it on the other side of the apartment at night, or tossing it into a drawer where she couldn't hear its insidious ring. But even then, the calls didn't stop. Soon, the voice left her cryptic messages. Don't go out tomorrow, it whispered, its words dripping with malice. Stay away from the street corner. You won't be safe there. Emily became consumed by paranoia. She stopped leaving her apartment, quit her job, and barely spoke to her friends, who were growing increasingly concerned. The world outside had become a dangerous place. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every passerby a potential stalker. She knew that whatever was happening, it was far from over. One night, after a particularly unsettling call in which the voice described her exact outfit in chilling detail, Emily decided she had to do something. The police had been useless, brushing off her story as the ramblings of a paranoid woman. She knew they wouldn't help her now. So she started investigating herself. She scoured her phone records, looking for any pattern, any clue. She went back through old messages, emails, anything that might have been hacked or accessed. But there was nothing. No signs of intrusion, no strange activity on her accounts. Then, one night, the voice said something different. I'm closer than you think. A chill ran down her spine as she realized the calls were no longer coming from a faraway source. The voice was right. Whoever it was, they were close. Emily began examining her apartment with fresh eyes. Was someone watching her? Did they have access to her building, her home? Every creak, every knock became a potential threat. Then she thought of something that had never crossed her mind before. The landline. Her building had an old, unused landline system, a relic from years ago that most tenants had forgotten about. But what if someone had tapped into it? What if the calls weren't coming from her cell phone at all? With shaking hands, she followed the line from the wall, tracing it to the small utility room in the corner of her apartment. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but dust-covered shelves and a jumble of old wires. But then she saw it. A phone, an old rotary phone, hidden behind a stack of boxes. It was connected to the wall, its cord snaking out into the dark. Emily hadn't even known it was there. Suddenly, the phone rang. Emily's blood ran cold. The sound was distant, muffled, but unmistakable. It was 11:47 p.m. The rotary phone sat there, vibrating slightly as the ringing continued. She hesitated, heart pounding, before picking it up with trembling hands. "Hello?" she whispered. The voice was louder now, clearer, and more real than it had ever been before. "I'm in the building." Emily dropped the phone, stumbling back in horror. The walls seemed to close in around her as the words echoed in her mind. She ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock, but as she pulled it open, she froze. There, standing in the hallway, was a man. His face was hidden in shadow, but the phone in his hand glowed faintly, casting an eerie light on his fingers. The phone rang again, this time from her pocket. Slowly, Emily reached into her bag and pulled out her cell phone, staring in horror at the screen. The call was coming from her own number. The man stepped forward, his face now fully illuminated. It was a face she had seen many times before, her neighbor. The quiet man who lived just across the hall, who she'd passed by 100 times without a second thought. His eyes gleamed with malice as he raised the phone to his ear. "Hello, Emily." She ran. The hallways twisted and turned in her panic as she sprinted down the stairs, her feet pounding against the concrete. Behind her, the man's footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate. She could hear the phone ringing again, its persistent chime chasing her through the darkness. Bursting out of the building into the night air, she gasped for breath. But her panic wasn't over yet. The streets were empty, the world around her eerily silent, as if waiting. She turned, half expecting to see the man right behind her, but the street was empty. Her phone rang once more. "I'm right behind you." She spun around, her eyes wild with terror, but there was no one there. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she backed into the shadows, heart pounding. She felt the walls of the alley press in on her, suffocating, as the phone continued to ring. And then, the voice whispered in her ear. "Run," Emily screamed, her voice echoing down the empty street. As the lights above flickered and went out, the ringing stopped, and the night swallowed her whole.